Hello and welcome back to another geography. Okay. Hello and welcome back to another geography explaining video with me, Mr. Koek, and the one and only Frans. Give it up for Frans. Let's go. And of course, this wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for Mr. Bejaoui. Give it up for Mr. Bejaoui. Woo! So, Frans, today we got a very, very wet episode for you. Namely, it's about rain and precipitation and how and why it rains and where it rains and why it rains there. Isn't that right, Frans? Exactly. Our topics for today are evaporation and condensation. And with that, we get precipitation. And then we have three different kinds of precipitation. We got relief precipitation. We got the convectional precipitation. And in the end, we have frontal precipitation. Alright. So, to understand how these three types of precipitation work, we first have to look at what precipitation means, and of course then what evaporation and condensation have to do with it. So, let's get right into the geography. So, first off, what is precipitation? Well, precipitation is water that falls down from the atmosphere to the Earth's surface in a liquid or solid state. So, precipitation is water that falls down from the atmosphere towards the Earth, to the Earth's surface, in either solid or liquid state. Think of rain, that is kind of liquid. Think of snow, it's kind of like mushy in between, or hail, which is actually solid. So precipitation is a word that you can use for all the types of water that fall from the atmosphere to the Earth's surface. So rain, snow, and hail. Alright, so now we know what precipitation is. But how do we get precipitation? Well, then we'll have to look at evaporation and condensation. You see, when the sun is shining, it gives down all its heat towards the Earth, here indicated in the yellow arrows. You see, and it heats up the ocean, or it heats up the land. And in the ocean, obviously there is water, but also on land there is water. For example, inside plants or in lakes and rivers. And all this water and land heats up, and when water heats up, at some point it will evaporate. When water gets warm, it will evaporate. And evaporation is water that changes from liquid into water vapor, also a form of gas. Water vapor is also what you get when you see a cup of tea. You know, that little bit of smoke going up from the cup of tea, just like sizzling up? That's water vapor. That happens because the tea is warm, the water is warm, and because it's warm, parts of it will turn into water vapor, into gas. So, because of the heat of the sun, the water will warm up, and some of that water will evaporate. And you have to know that warm things rise up. So, the evaporated water, also the water vapor, goes up into the atmosphere. And it keeps on rising, and it keeps on rising, and rising, and rising. But the higher you get into the atmosphere, the colder it gets. And you can see that by the arrows. The higher you get, the colder the arrow gets. From a warmer, more red color to a colder, more blue color. And at some point, it is so cold in the atmosphere that the water vapor turns back into liquid. And this is what we call condensation. Condensation. water vapor, the gas form, turns back into liquid water. So the higher you get into the atmosphere, the colder it gets, and then the water vapor will turn into liquid, so little droplets. And all those little droplets together form a cloud. So now we know the basics of evaporation and condensation and how this causes precipitation. But now, there are 3 types of precipitation. There is relief precipitation, there is convectional precipitation, and there is frontal precipitation. So first, relief precipitation. And for that, we have traveled into the cloud to have a nice overview over the situation. We are here for the relief precipitation. Relief are differences in height, so this type of precipitation has to do something with a difference in height. And, well, would you look at that? There is a big height difference between the ocean and eventually the mountains. When the wind is blowing towards the mountains, the wind cannot go through the mountain. It has to either go over it or all the way around it. And when some of that wind goes up against the mountain, the air has to go higher and higher. And remember what happens when you go higher and higher into the atmosphere? It gets colder. So all the air that is relatively warm at the bottom gets pushed up against the mountain and is forced to condensate. Remember, condensation happens high in the atmosphere where it is colder and where water vapor turns back into liquid. So all the water vapor that's just floating around here, and at some point it has to go a bit more up, and the vapor turns back into liquid, starting to rain down again. So with relief precipitation, the mountains cause the air to rise up. Mountains block the way of the air, so the air has to go over. When the air goes over, it cools down. Higher equals colder. As the air goes up and cools down, water vapor will condensate and turn into liquid drops. And those turn into clouds. And eventually, those clouds will rain over the mountain. And there you have it. Relief precipitation. Almost. So there you go. Relief precipitation. All right. Back down in our base, we now know the relief precipitation. So on to the next one, convectional precipitation. For that, we just stay down here, because this one is quite an easy one. Convectional rainfall you can only find around the equator. This is where the sun is the strongest. A lot of heat is given towards the ground, and all of the water around on the ocean and land will evaporate from this heat. The evaporation causes the air to go up around the equator, and at some point in the atmosphere it will cool down, it will condensate. And this causes the clouds to immediately form and immediately rain down. It is basically a very small circle. The water evaporates, it goes up, it condensates, it turns into a cloud, and it rains. And back up again. It evaporates, it condensates, turns into a cloud, and it rains. That is convectional rainfall. So, convectional rainfall is pretty basic and only found near the equator, because this is where the sun is the strongest and can cause this convectional rainfall. Alright, time for the last one, Frans. Time for frontal precipitation. Here we are, back on our cloud, and looking into a beautiful landscape. What is going on here? I see a couple arrows coming towards each other, some going up, some going down. And how is this frontal precipitation? Well, with frontal, you have to think of two fronts bumping into each other. But unlike a car crash where two cars just bump into each other and stop, the air actually has to go somewhere. They don't stop. So we have frontal precipitation. How does that work? Well, we need a couple ingredients. We need warm air from one area going towards cold air from another area. So you find this type of precipitation in areas where there is warm air colliding with cold air. And as I just said, it is not a car crash. They don't just bump into each other and that's it in the middle. No, there's actually a movement going on. You see, what happens is, once again, warm air wants to rise compared to cold air. So when cold air and warm air bump into each other, the cold air pushes the warm air up. And what happens when air goes up higher into the atmosphere? That's right, it cools down, causing the evaporated water that is in the warm air to go up and condensate in the higher places of the atmosphere, the colder places. And then clouds are formed, and those clouds eventually can empty, causing precipitation and rain, causing, in this case, frontal precipitation. Two fronts, the cold front and the warm front, bumping into each other, causing rain. And there you have it, guys. The precipitation explained in Minecraft. All in one Minecraft day. Perfect. The moon is rising, full moon, so time to turn into a werewolf. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.